The views expressed in this podcast are our own and do not constitute endorsement by the Department of Defense, Department of the Air Force, or the U.S. government. Bring us her triumphs, her challenges, her legacy. Bring us women. A podcast brought to you by Isabella Horning and Allie Clark. Welcome back, Bring Us Women Squad. This month's guest is living proof that you can balance classified missions, clinical rotations, and toddler tantrums and still chase your wildest dreams. This episode will be part inspiration, part therapy session, and 100% girl power, just the way we like it.
Meet Kali Kingsley, USAFA Class of 2011, intelligence officer, mom of two, med student, and future psychiatrist. Welcome, Kali.
Thank you guys for having me. I was trying to hold back my laughter at that intro. That was pretty cute.
Yeah, we had to come up with something awesome for you. So we're so glad to have you on and that you could take time out of your clearly very busy schedule to join us today.
Thanks. I love that you guys are doing this. I think it's amazing to try and get out there and reach more women that are interested in the military.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We're super excited about it. So, kind of just jumping into it, we kind of want to know what initially inspired you to attend the Air Force Academy.
Yeah, so that's that question everyone asks you, right? When you're your first year and you're sitting at like breakfast or whatever at the academy, and they're like, all right, why is everyone here? And people always have these motivational messages or like, I wanted to serve. And I didn't have that. I did it because it seemed like a challenge. I had actually my entire life wanted to go to med school. I had completed my associate's degree when I was in high school, and I was all set up to go to an in-state college. I was going to graduate college at 19 and then go to med school. And I had a boyfriend at the time who was like kind of interested in the military and he was looking at stuff. And I was like, you're not smart enough to go there, but I am. And we had a family friend whose sons had gone to West Point, so he was like trying to really introduce me to it. I did this summer seminar at West Point, and I was like, this is not for me. I came back singing all the Jodies about like gore and death, and my mom was like, what happened to my baby? But I don't know, the Air Force Academy just kind of like, I was like, this seems challenging in the academic, you can't get an Ivy League essentially. So that's how I did it.
That's awesome. I feel like that's a common theme for you. You like the challenge, and honestly, I think that's just as inspiring as all of the other stories. You heard about it and you're like, I can do that. I can 100% do that.
Thanks.
Well, Callie, as a behavioral science major at the academy, and you're also a collegiate athlete, how did both of those things that you did while you were at USAFA prepare you for both leadership and the mental endurance that you'd experience later in life?
So I think probably more than I even realized. So behavioral science or psychology, if you're at almost any other institution, I think especially because part of it is our core curriculum at the academy, and they teach you a lot about leadership just within the behavioral science classes, but also learning about how people think and how different people process their experiences and how that impacts them. And so I think that just early on, it kind of taught me how to approach different situations and different people and to just have a lot more empathy. And then for athletics, I think that teaches everyone just how to be a team player, how to work together. I was a competitive swimmer from age 6 to 17 when I graduated high school. And then I went to the academy and I just didn't want to do fourth degree stuff. And so I walked onto the fencing team because I was like, this is how I can get out of training sessions.
She knew the cheat code.
Yes, yeah, uh-huh. And so I walked onto that, which is just wild. But then after that, I hurt my knees pretty badly doing that. So I ended up doing water polo, and then I was the wing yoga instructor. I don't know if they still have that going on or not, but I taught yoga like twice a week down at the gym. But yeah, just, that whole thing that you learn from being on a team and just working together with people.
Well, that's crazy that you taught yoga because I know that that is one of like the hardest PE classes at the academy.
You guys have yoga as PE now?
Yeah.
Stop. That's amazing.
You probably were the influence.
I'm
So,
so I was when I was firsty, I was going to core power yoga like 4 days a week, and then I was teaching at like 5 a.m. 2 or 3 times a week for I always got like the soccer players and the track players were coming down there, the dudes that are like big and they're like, I can crush yoga, and I would put them through their paces. They would be like dying. Oh
That's
gosh.
awesome.
Oh
That's
yeah.
awesome. That it's
Yoga is
impressive.
like one of the hardest things I've ever done, which is why I typically avoid it and I did not take the PE class
It's
because
it's
it's
essential. I did a half Ironman the year I graduated, and I could not have done it had I not been doing yoga the way that I was doing it. I mean, I'm always telling people it's so good for your body and your mind. Like just before every exam that I've taken for med school, and I know I'm going on a tangent here, I did yoga every morning. I can't say enough positive things about yoga.
no, this is great to hear because I've actually been recently looking for yoga studios near where I live in DC. So I've been like tempted to try to make myself do it because I'm not the
Find a
best when
power
it comes
yoga.
to
Not, I
all
can't do
that.
hot yoga. It makes me irrationally angry, but power yoga.
I did do hot yoga the other week and I actually was slipping all over my mat. I hate to say that, but I was like, I thought I was in shape,
Oh,
but
it's
I
so
think
good.
I sweat my body weight
Oh,
in
yeah.
sweat.
No, it makes me really, really angry. Like I would leave it just like irate. And I'm like, I don't, this might not be what it's supposed to be doing for me. So I've stepped away from that. I like the power yoga.
Noted. Well, kind of after that time at the academy, you were heading into senior year, and on your dream sheet, you put Intel. What was your kind of thought process behind that?
So I actually tried to go for OSI, so Office of Special Investigations, for anyone who doesn't know that. And my class only got 2 slots for OSI, and I was the alternate, which was the first time that I had ever not gotten something that I had applied for or tried to get, actually.
Yeah.
Intel was my second choice. I knew pretty early on that I did not want to be a pilot. And, you get so many opportunities to fly when you're at the academy. So I had flown in a tanker, I'd flown in a C-17. Man, we did low levels, I think, and it was maybe a C-130. And on one of the Air Force Ops ones, I had an F-16 ride. And I was like, this is not for me. And so
I
Intel was
felt
the
the same
closest I
way.
could, yeah, Intel was the closest I could get to OSI. And really, I had wanted to go to med school, but I kind of gave up on myself while I was at the academy. I kind of stopped doing the prereqs that I needed. You really have to be a bio or a chem major. You can't really be a behavioral science major and try to go to med school from the academy because you have to then take more classes on top of what's already like a very rigorous core curriculum. And so I kind of talked myself out of that. I was like, man, I don't need to be a doctor. Like, I'll be okay. Like, Intel will be totally cool, serving in a totally different way. That'll be amazing. And so that's kind of how I ended up as an Intel officer.
That's awesome. So, well, then moving forward from that, you served now over a decade as an Air Force intelligence officer. What were some of the favorite positions that you had while you were doing that, and how did you kind of, embrace that opportunity?
Yeah, so I did 9 or 10 years of active duty and 4 so far now on the reserves because I am still a reservist. I was with RPAs at Creech, and then I had a really great deployment doing that I really, really enjoyed doing a lot of stuff when things were really kicking off, and that felt good. And then I was the deputy chief of targets for USAFA Africa when we were stationed in Germany. And I really liked that because I was really leading a team. So I had we had a large team of airmen, and that was probably the biggest team that I'd had of leading and just like these very young airmen. And I just had a lot of opportunities to mentor them and to work with them. And when I left that position, my going away was really pretty large. And I had a couple of them kind of talk at it and just say things that I had done that had made a positive impact in their life and had made things, better for them or that had changed how they saw stuff. And for me, that's like what it's all about. That is, I might absolutely despise a job, but if the people that are working with me or for me feel that I have in some way inspired them or made something better or advocated for them, then that's all I really need from that. So I felt really good leaving that one.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm in my first unit level intelligence assignment, and so hearing that makes me feel really good because there's a lot of hard days, when you're first like trying to get into that groove of like, okay, I'm the supervisor now. They're looking to me for the answers, and I've been so worried about saying the right thing or taking the right course of action, but hearing that like you settle into it and then people end up really appreciating that, especially these young airmen, that their first officer that they might have is like very formative in their Air Force careers. So I'm really glad that you mentioned your RPA assignment, and then I know that you also led the top targeting team for two combatant commands. How did these highly intense environments kind of impact your personal resilience and get you started on that interest in mental health?
So when I was in RPAs, we had an NCO who, after his first strike, basically kind of had like a psychotic break and really had a huge mental health crisis. And so watching that, but then also the biggest thing for me with RPAs is, so when I was in RPAs back in 2012, they did not essentially qualify for PTSD like classification because of the fact that they were not in like physical danger. There's very specific requirements that are outlined for what PTSD is. And so
Hmm.
at the time, and now RPA pilots can have PTSD, they do now recognize that, but they were basically like, you're sitting there at work watching people and then potentially watching people die. And then you drive home to your kids. Then you're also on shift work, which shift work, there's so many studies that show about how hard that is on your own mental health and your health in general. So you're having people on shift work, getting terrible sleep, in a very high stress job, then going home, which is previously never been done in a like a warfare environment, right? Normally you deploy with your team, you debrief with your team. And that wasn't happening. And so I'm sitting there looking around, 21, 22 years old, being like, this is like, we're missing something here.
Yeah.
And there was still, and I know there always is a little bit of stigma around mental health with the military, but there was a big one still back then. There was
Yeah.
still like, no one wants to talk about it. No one wants to talk about what they're doing and what they're seeing. And I didn't know anything, but I knew that what was happening was not enough. And luckily, a lot of other people have recognized that. There's books. There was a book that was written on killing remotely that talks about that whole experience from the pilot's perspective and mental health and stuff. And so I think that's gotten a lot better. But that was just something just very early on in my career that I witnessed. And then even my own different jobs that I'd had, what I really found with all of them is that I really needed to feel valued, and I needed to feel like what I was doing was impactful. Otherwise, I started to just feel like depressed. And there were
Yeah.
some jobs that I had where I would be driving into work almost having panic attacks just because I was so miserable because I felt useless. I felt useless and I felt undervalued, and it just like I could tell, like I could literally feel myself get more miserable the closer I would get and then when I would leave. And so that kind of put in, that thought for whenever I'm working with anyone else, like making sure that whatever that I was doing within my ability made them feel valued and made sure that they weren't just doing busy work or just doing like that there was a point to what we were doing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's really.
You have to pay attention.
I feel like that's a well. After you served active duty, you decided to transition to the reserves. So, what made you choose to do that?
So, like I kind of said, I was always really my goal. And so when I was in Vegas, I was slowly working away at pre-med prereqs. And when I was in Germany, I was slowly kind of doing it. And then we moved to Louisiana, and then I had my daughter in March of 2020. So as the world shut down, if you will. And med schools then started to change their policies and that they would accept some classes that you had taken online when they previously hadn't. So now all of a sudden, these prereqs that I had taken online that med schools previously were not really going to take. We're like, all right, like I guess we'll take that. And so I was like, all right, I guess like I've been slowly kind of working towards this, but like this is it now. Like we're done. We're going to apply. And so I studied for the MCAT while I was breastfeeding my newborn in like a 3 month period. And I took the MCAT the first time and I did not do great. And I did not get into med school that first application cycle. And so I separated to go into the reserves. And so that I was kind of working part-time, but then I took a couple extra classes. And then I volunteered at the base clinic. And I took the MCAT again when I wasn't like postpartum, breastfeeding, brain fog. And I
Yeah.
applied again and I got in that time.
Well, I think that's a good message about perseverance, especially when it comes to the med school applications. I know my twin also was applying and taking the MCAT, and so I saw her journey with that. I know a lot of the med school students now are taking off like entire years just to focus on studying for that test, and takes most of them multiple tries to get in. So I think that that's a good message for anyone that's trying to get into med school that, if you keep trying and working, you know, it will hopefully happen for you. So,
Yeah, you just got to, see where the spots that are you're weakest and, strengthen them.
I also feel like it's a testament to your ability because most people are not studying for the MCAT and having a newborn at the same time, which is pretty insane.
Yeah, people say that a lot. And they also say like, having kids in med school, because not a lot of women do that. And, I have nothing to compare it to. I know nothing else other than taking the MCAT with a newborn, going to med school with kids. So everyone's kind of journey, it's hard for everyone. And so I have nothing to compare it to. It just, this was the path my only option. And so this is the option that I took.
well,
Oh,
let me just say, I'm still trying to hype myself up to go drag my ass to get my master's degree. So I think that this is an
Oh, girl,
amazing
did you do that
story.
like Intel one? I did that Intel,
Yeah,
that
yeah. So
Intel, that Intel Masters.
yeah, you're like just that old masters. I'm on to bigger and better. No, I'm very inspired. So let me just say
Thank you.
that.
That's really sweet.
well, kind of like moving in this same direction. Oftentimes, I feel like when we're at the academy or when we're like new into our Air Force career, we're almost like blindsided to all the other opportunities that are outside of the Air Force, whether that be reserves, guard, other things that you can do, like using your GI Bill, etc. And we almost get into this bubble where we tie our identity so much to the military and our military service. So it makes even transitioning out of the military so much more difficult. So, what advice would you give to someone that is looking to start that new chapter outside of the Air Force or just a different direction in the Air Force?
Yeah, so I don't know that I'm great on giving this advice because it is hard. It is it is hard to give that up. I mean, I literally have still been doing reserve duty while I've been in med school because I struggle so hard with that separation that I haven't really been able to fully just give it up. And I think probably going to the academy makes it even more ingrained in your identity. You just have to take it a little bit at a time. You have to ease into it, honestly. Like I couldn't have done cold turkey. I couldn't have just given it up because there's a part of it that it's just such a support network and it's your friends and it's everything that you know. I mean, it's everything that I had known since I was 17.
Yeah.
To just give that up and change it, it's really hard. I have a really good friend who she graduated the year after me and she's a children's author now. And she did the same thing, active duty. And Jamie, she was in it. Like she was intel, like working for all the generals and doing the most of the most. And transitioned finally to the reserves. And she finally just went to the IRR to kind of separate more. But you have to ease into it. I think, like, because I don't think it's ever going to not be a part of my identity.
Yeah, especially, kind of that with that transition, you mentioned it. You started med school in your 30s at LSU Health in Shreveport while balancing, that life in the reserves and starting that new chapter and motherhood. So, kind of speaking with all of those challenges, what were the biggest challenges that you kind of faced during those years?
So I had really, really bad postpartum brain fog, essentially, and anxiety with my second. Um, really bad. And I didn't quite realize it, like what it was until I was in it. And so I was like almost having like panic attacks and tests. And I mean, I had never had that. I had never had anxiety before. I was in Astro, honestly, just like surviving, just getting through each test. Like I was just like this test, now the next test. And my husband is just a rock star and just did the most. He was probably doing at one point, during my second year of med school, he was probably doing like 90% of the parent activities, taking the kids to school, picking up the kids from school, taking the kids to gymnastics. And then our moms came and they stayed with us and they were helping with the kids. So I had a huge support network, but I mean, it was brutal. Like it was absolutely like it was not second year of med school for me with the newborn, and I mean, the newborn phase is the best phase, but it was
Hmm.
brutal. I mean, there's not a really nice way to put it.
No, I mean, I think it's good for people to hear that because I think people look at whether it's like through social media these days where it's like picture perfect everything or like everyone has their lives together or, they're balancing all these different things and you just like sit at home in your own little social media hole and you're wondering why can't I balance my life like that person's balancing theirs?
Yeah,
And
no, there was no balance. There was no balance. There was med school taking up most of my life. And then, I'd wake up, I'd study while working out. I'd go to school. I mean, I'd help get girls ready for school. Then I would go to school. My husband would take them to school. Then he would pick them up. I would come home. I would study until dinner. I'd make dinner. We would do dinner and bedtime. Then they'd go to bed and then I would study some more. So like there was no real balance for a while there.
yeah, and I think that's good to hear because people don't from the outside looking in, it's hard to see that oftentimes. And even like, it also seems like you had a good support network, which is
Mhm.
also really important for when you want to do all these badass things or you want to make these giant leaps in your life. Like having those people to support you is also super important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Callie, we know that you've been knocking out some of your residency interviews lately. How have those been going? And do you have any advice for listeners preparing for med school interviews?
Yeah. So I've actually had a few, and although this is also great practice for that as well. And in one of my last ones, there was another student from a different school, and he was very nervous. He was so incredibly nervous. And so we have this kind of time before people come into the interview groups. And I was just trying to be like, look, like like at this point, they have looked at who you are on paper. They already know on paper you're good. If you get to that interview session, they want to know who you are as a person. And it's really just about having a conversation. And I think, I really had my first set of like intense interviews when I was 17 and you're interviewing for I had an appointment to the Air Force Academy, the Naval Academy, and West Point. And I actually got congressional nominations and Senate nominations to all three. But that's a period
Okay.
of, yeah, I had all of them. But that's six sets of interviews. I interviewed with all of my congressional and Senate representation and then staffs for all of those academies. And so that was more than half of my life ago. So I've been interviewing for things ever since. And I think I've just kind of learned you really have to, I mean, you have to be prepared, obviously, going into anything, whether it's for the Air Force Academy, whether it's for squadron commander at the Air Force Academy, whether it's for medical school or residency, you have to be obviously prepared. But beyond being prepared for the position and what you're interviewing for, I think it's important to know and be true to who you are as a person. And so, like in so many interviews, people just want to know who you are as a person. Are you someone that they can rely on, that they can trust, that can lead, that they want to work with day in and day out? And so I love interviewing, and I'm really excited to be in the interview session season for residency to get to know these programs and to kind of talk to them about what my passions are. And so that's really what I was trying to tell this other student was I was like, just tell them why you want to be here. Tell them why you're excited and why you're special and why you can help them make a difference. Because that's what people want to know. They want to know, who you are, if they can trust you, and if on a day-to-day basis, if they want to talk to you, if they want to work with you. That's really what's so
Absolutely.
key, I think, when it comes to residency interviews, but really most interviews.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's taking me back to my academy interviews when I had to get in, or when we all interviewed to get in, and then even to all the clubs like while you're at the Air Force Academy, and they're like, "Why do
Hmm.
we want you? Would you be a good teammate? Would we actually want to hang out with you in our free time?" And you're like,
Yes.
play it cool, trying to do your
Yeah, the
thing, but
academy really, I mean, they really helped me prepare because I was a group commander and I was a group commander during basic training, and then I was a squadron commander during the academic school year. And so you interview, for both of those, and it's to your peers, which is almost in some ways more intimidating,
yes.
Yes.
right? Um, but I've kind of just with all of these things, and I don't like my school gave me a program for AI that can, I guess it can watch you practice these questions and like give you feedback. And I've actually never practice an interview. I have never externally practiced an interview. Like in my head, I'm running through things all the time. I'm having conversations. I'm asking myself the most absurd questions that no one in the entire world would ever ask me and answering them on my drive to work. You know what I mean? But I've never, I'm not even touching this AI program. It like terrifies me, honestly. I don't want to know what it's going to tell me about how I think and how I respond to people. But like it gave that, and I'm just like, no, like it's just a conversation. Like, you know, you you just have to be confident. Like you have put in the work, or at least, you should have put in the work.
No, absolutely.
It's brutal. It's brutal. It's hard. You can't do it alone. I am grateful that I have an incredible community. So I have, my mother and my mother-in-law that helped come out and help watch the kids, and my dad would come help do stuff around the house. My husband, who handled, when I was in my second year of med school, when we had a newborn, because our second was born the end of my first year. He did 90% of the childcare probably that second year of medical school. He took the kids to school, he took the kids to daycare, doctor's appointments, anything. He was FaceTiming me from doctor's appointments when I would step out of lecture for that. And then my Air Force office has just been so great with how they've been able to work with me. I'm an IMA versus a traditional reservist, so I can kind of pick and choose when I come in. And my office and my leadership has just been so incredibly supportive of me in this journey. And I am lucky that, I'm not really a necessity in my office, so they can afford to not put me on orders, so I don't have to do any more than the required reserve time. But there is no balance. Me putting 80% into med school and 20% into family, and then there's me having the few days where I get to put 90% into my family and 10% into med school. And there's just being supported by your family and friends. And I was telling my friends like, hey, like I might not talk to you for the next month. Just like know that I'm like in it right now. And
What
my
was
friend,
their response to that? How did they deal with that?
I mean, the people that I choose to have in my life are supportive of that. The people that I choose to surround myself with understand who I am as a person and as a friend, and those are like in my core circle. And so they understand, like if I can't plan a trip, and I'm gonna be like, hey, like I can show up here, but you have to put in all the work. That's fine. They know how to do that and they support me. I had one friendship that was a relatively new friendship that completely disintegrated. And that was just somebody who did not understand where I was in my life and could not respect that. And so I just chose to no longer pursue that friendship with that person. And, I'm kind of at that point in my life where I'm comfortable making that decision. The people in my life are only people that bring me value. They're only people that are going to encourage me and support me, and that I am going to encourage and support. And so that's the only way I think that you can get through something like medical school with two kids and a spouse that's working full time in your 30s and 40s. It just I couldn't do it without such a strong and stable support network.
No, yeah, that's awesome. And I think what you said about how some days you had 80% into med school and 20% into your family, but then in those days when you could put 90% into your family, you did. I think that's really important, but because I think sometimes people forget that like they either put so much into whatever work they're doing that they totally neglect everything else in their life, or they try to do everything at once, and that just makes it more difficult for them. So I think that's important that it is a balance in a way.
Yeah, it's an imbalance balance, and it's understanding it that you're making those choices, I think. And to go kind of on a tangent, but I think something that's super important that I try and tell people is, so I do not subscribe to mom guilt. And that's something that some people on social media have tried to push on me when I post about me spending the weekends studying at school. My husband takes the kids to birthday parties. Is they're saying, people will try and say, "Oh, you're missing this and that." And I do not subscribe to mom guilt. I am making the choice that is best for me and for my family. And to that extent, like, I know that my kids are well loved and well supported. And when they look at me, they can look at a mom that is, pursuing her dreams. And that is who I want to be for my children. I want to have a job where I come home and I am fulfilled and happy, and I can role model that for them. And so some people really want to kind of push that. And there's a difference, I think, between missing your kids and feeling guilty about it. So when I was at school on Saturdays, 3 weekends in a row, and my husband's taking the kids to all the parties, I missed them. I wanted to be there, but I didn't feel guilty about choosing what I needed to do, because I needed to be there and studying so that I could pass that test, so that I could get through medical school, so that I could be the kind of doctor that I want to be for my family. And so I think it's okay to recognize that you're not always going to have that balance, and that sometimes, like, you're going to have to put yourself first. And that's okay. I think that's okay. And I think that more women should know that that's okay, and that they need to kind of, I hate the term mom guilt, and I hate when people push that. And so I try and push back on that, where I just think that's something that, like, society has created, that, like, we want to commiserate on. And I do not, as I've said, I just don't subscribe to that.
Yeah, because I mean, I think if you're not the best version of yourself, doing the best version of whatever makes you happy, what makes you the best version of you, then how can you be the best version of you for your family, for your daughters, for your friends?
Exactly.
Yeah, I also, on my Instagram, I subscribe to the Brain Rot Core. So I also a lot of what I watch is like the cooking videos of moms like making meals for their kids, trying to make like a well-balanced meal. And it's so crazy to me the amount of times where like I'll just look at the comment sections. I need to stay away from the comment sections because they're so sometimes so negative, but it's always
Yeah.
like why would you cook that for them? Why would you do that with your kids? This is the way that you should raise your kids. So I think it's so good to hear that from you, that it's like you need to do what's right for your family and what's right for, setting yourself on track for success. And kind of along that note too, we know that you have two daughters that are currently 2 and 5. How is being a girl mom, and what is your favorite activity to do with them when you have that free time?
Yeah, so anyone who has ever known me has known that I was only ever going to be a girl mom. Told my husband that, and I was like, "Look, we can only have girls, just so to be clear about this, because I cannot I'm not boy mom coded." And so it's great. They are extremely strong-willed, independent children, which I'm sure will be a struggle in about 10 years from now. But we love baking. They love baking with me, and they love, like, sometimes I'll just put on some good music. I'll throw on some Avicii, some throwbacks, and they'll just dance. It's such a privilege to watch them grow up into the girls, and if I guess eventually women that they're gonna be. It's so cool watching I mean, they're just so cool. Kids are just so cool. I love it. Like, I love my kids. I love being a girl mom and all the things, despite the fact that they might go through. And the other day, my 2-year-old wrote on my floor with my mascara. Yeah.
She's an
And
artist.
yeah, despite those moments, I'll I love it all the same.
Yeah, Mia and Issa were talking about it too because we saw on your Instagram that you have the girls out and flying already. So, I mean, they might be using mascara on the floors, but they're also sophisticated flyers. So we have to give
Yes.
credit where credit's due.
Yes, my 5-year-old will wear a full-on bell gown to go fly the airplane with her dad. That is 100% her personality. She's been in plane with my husband now, I think 26 times. I think she's been in the front seat. I don't know if it's maybe 10 or 12 times now. And the last few, she's really kind of taken it, and she'll hold the yoke while my husband holds the other side, and he'll tell her to put us into a slight turn to the right, and she's so good about it. It's so crazy. And I don't love flying. I never wanted to be a pilot. And so I'm in the back just trying to, like, not exude any sort of negative energy so that she can just love it and be confident, because I don't want her to have any of my negative feelings about being in an airplane. I just want her to just crush it, and she loves it. She puts on her Anna boots and her big gowns, and she
Queen.
just, yes, it's so cool. I love it so much. And the 2-year-old, she's been flying since she's I think we probably took her up for her first flight when she was 3 months old. And so, just kind of, I want to raise them to be fearless as much as one can be.
That's awesome. Well, do you think they have the academy in their future? Like maybe a future pilot now that she's starting so young?
I hope so. I could totally see the 5-year-old ending up as a fighter pilot. I could absolutely see that in her personality. My husband was not an academy grad, and so I think he's a little bit, he'll be devastated to hear me say, I think he's a little jealous that he didn't go to the academy. But he doesn't really want them to go to the Air Force Academy. But I would not be upset if one of them followed and ended up being a legacy in CS-23 Barnstormers. I think it'd be pretty cool.
Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed because me and Issa want that too.
I'm gonna
Kind
keep the
of.
brainwashing. It's just that subtle, just the subtle brainwashing. And you just start at a young age and you just keep it up, and before you know it, they don't even know what happened.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, kind of along that note of parenting, we know that you've become a strong advocate for student parents, even passing Resolution 402 on transparent parental leave for medical students. Did you receive any pushback in your efforts, and how did that feel to finally see that pass?
Yeah, so that that was through the Louisiana State Medical Society Student Section, and that was a resolution basically going to and saying, like, schools in the state of Louisiana should have a parental leave policy, which sounds obvious, but my school didn't have one when I had my daughter. And what I learned through that process was how many medical students, and there's not very many that have kids. I think like 5% of people in medical school have children, but a lot of them were having their first, and they didn't know how to advocate for themselves. They didn't know what they deserved. They didn't know the treatment they should have, the amount of leave that they should have. And if a school doesn't have something in place, then you're going to get taken advantage of, or people are just going to let you do what you're going to do, and it's not going to be enough. And so that didn't force any schools to create a policy. Basically, was saying, hey, like, we at the LSMS think that you should have this policy. So it's not enough, but it was something. And there wasn't really pushback, no, probably because it wasn't a forcing mechanism. My school worked with me to help create my school's parental leave policy, which was much appreciated, because when I was going in to have my daughter, there was nothing. And I was being like, hey, what's the plan? Because I had my first when I was in the Air Force. And so I know, you know, the military might not always get everything right, but one thing they do get right is parental leave. They're basically leading the pack when it's still not enough.
I know that as you've been talking to us, you've kind of been talking a lot about how throughout your career, a lot of women have kind of sought you out for the advice that you have to give when it comes to, the military, school, and medicine. What's kind of the most common?
That you have to advocate for yourself, that you can't trust that anyone else is going to do it for you. And it's hard. That's really hard to advocate for yourself, especially if you haven't done it before, if you don't know what to ask for even in the first place. But that's the ultimate thing is that you have to speak up and you have to advocate for yourself because you cannot trust that anyone else is going to do that for you. It would be great if you had a leader, a commander, a supervisor, a friend, anybody who can do that for you, but you can't trust that that's going to happen. And more often than not, you're going to end up being that person who's going to end up advocating for yourself and helping someone else, I think.
No, I think that's amazing advice, and it's goes within whatever job, wherever you're at, whatever it is that you're doing. Because even at my assignment now, there's lots of lieutenants, and we're at a really big organization. And depending on who your supervisor is, really depends on what your, quality of job is at that organization. Because if you have a really great supervisor, you have to advocate less for yourself because we're lieutenants and we might not know what it is that we need to be advocating for. But if you don't have a great supervisor, you're kind of alone and afraid in a big organization. So knowing that you should be advocating for yourself is, I think, really important. Well, kind of turning into what you're looking to specialize in and after medical school, you're applying for psychiatry. So what drew you to this specialty after everything you've seen and experienced?
Um, so I've always loved psychology, but I've seen a lot. I had a classmate commit suicide my last year at the academy when we were at a formation. And then I had a squadron mate commit suicide the year after I graduated. And then I went to RPAs at Creech, where during a time where RPA pilots didn't even qualify for PTSD diagnoses because of their physical distance from theoretical danger. And so there was a severe lack of mental health in that environment. And that was really something that I noticed right away. And it was weird to me that other people didn't notice it, but that's just how my mind has always worked. And when I was at Creech, there was no CGOC, a company grade officer council, when I first got there, which most bases have. And if any base needed it, it was really Creech, I was thinking, because,
Yeah.
most times when people deploy in history, they deploy as a unit and they redeploy as a unit. And there's a level of that helps preserve your mental health and helps you process your experience. And these people that are in RPAs were not having that opportunity to process what they were experiencing. So I helped build the CGOC at Creech because I saw a place where we were lacking and it needed to be filled to help support people. And then as I've gone through, even in the medicine and the surgical ones, my mind always goes to the mental health. If we're doing in the NICU rotation and the neonatal, everyone else is around the little babies in these tiny little boxes, and I'm going to the mom and being like, "How are you doing? Like, where's your mind at right now?" And so for me, I think it's honestly just it's a fundamental part of my personality to be interested and care about mental health to the level that I do. That's just how passionate I am about it. So it kind of wasn't a choice.
I think that's so important to have people like that in our organizations, really any organization, but especially, as you mentioned, working in an RPA squadron. And now we know that RPA squadrons have some of the highest rates of suicide in our military. So bringing that to Creech, I'm sure, was a really, really needed and beneficial thing for all of them. How did your work with the Institute of Childhood Resilience and also that trust-based relational intervention shape some of your views on trauma and healing?
So I had my first daughter in March of 2020. So right when the world shut down and policy changes were putting in place that I was looking at as a new mom, thinking were significantly affecting the mental health of both women and children. And then I looked even further around in my own community. In Shreveport, we have a lot of struggles when it comes to children. I think something like 30% of kids going into trust-based relational intervention through the Volunteers for Youth Justice in our community was one of those ways where you can kind of help foster parents and families dealing with children coming from hard places, form connections, and help these kids learn coping mechanisms to deal with their trauma. And the Institute of Child Resilience at my school helps kind of broadcast that even further by we've gone to schools, we've gone to like the juvenile justice department and just speaking about trauma, how it affects the brain, how it affects behavior, how to help people reconnect and deal with that trauma in their past. And so it's opened my eyes on how adversity can help you and also break you down, and how resilience is so significant in forming who you are, but how important it is in helping you get through everything. And so how much, the building blocks of resilience, if you don't form those connections with these kids and with people, how much of a struggle everything else is on top of it.
I mean, kind of hearing that now that you've had these experiences and you've worked with these programs, once you become a psychiatrist, do you want to continue to specialize in things with children or kind of going back to that
Yes.
PTSD and that kind of realm?
I definitely kids. I definitely want to be a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I think that children are our most vulnerable population, and as such, they require the most protection. And that I think that an unhealed child becomes an unhealed adult, and that causes a significantly greater strain on society and is a much harder issue
Yeah.
to contend with. And so many children, especially in the community I live in right now, just don't have enough of a support network. And that's just kind of one of those going to continue pursuing psychiatry from the child and adolescent perspective.
Well, kind of what are some things that you think that parents can be doing to kind of instill this resiliency, in their children at that younger age?
So the number one thing that I think is to get away from screens. And I've people really get upset when you say that, but I am very much against screens. And there's books out there, The Anxious Generation and the Coddling of the American Mind and other things that can support. We've now had longitudinal studies about the negative effects of screen time on children. And I think that we've lost a lot of childhood. And so I think from a at a baseline to take the phones and the screens away from kids, to get outside. There's those Instagram accounts, 1,000 hours outside, and those movements. I think those are so instrumental and so significant right now for kids, because I think what it really comes down to is connection. And I think that it's something that we've kind of lost a bit of as a society. Um, that technology, while it can bring us together, it can also really degrade the connections that we form. And so that is really the baseline. And I think a lot of kids these days truly lack the ability to cope with the world around them. And so I think that, moving away from screens is the number one thing that I try and tell people that I think that they should do. And I know it's hard and I know people really push back on that, but my I kind of come to that and I say, well, like we weren't raised on screens. I didn't have a phone. I didn't have any of those things. And I I would much rather have been a parent 30 years ago, honestly, to a certain extent, than a parent now because it's so much harder to contend with.
Yeah.
No, I
Yeah.
I I agree for sure. I remember being the last kid in my class to get a phone, and at the time I was so upset with my parents because I was like, everyone else has one, I want one. Now I'm not cool. Well, looking back, like I'm so grateful that my parents made me play outside and do all the things that I should have been doing as a kid and not on my phone.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard and it's only going to get harder. I mean, it truly is. But that's something that we did. We didn't do any screen time for our kid before the age of 2. And I'm grateful for that, I just started from day one. I was like, this is what it's going to be, and we're going to push through on that. And I do think that they have benefited from that. And I'm going to continue to be kind of over the top about it, probably with my kids.
I think that's great advice. When the time comes and I do have kids, I'll be referring back to this episode. But I think the point that you made about not only children struggling to cope with their everyday stressors and the things around them, but also adults as well. And I know one of the biggest struggles that comes with that is when you are, kind of struggling with those stressors in your life, how do you know when it's time to ask for help? So I kind of want to know, what would you say to someone who still feels like they can't ask for help or is struggling to ask for help?
That's a really hard one. I think that it's important to surround yourself with people who are willing to be honest with you. And, a lot of times they can be the mirror to tell you, hey, like you should probably see someone. There's someone you need to talk to about that. But there's just, one of the great things that has happened is that there's a lot less shame associated with mental health, I think. We're a lot more open about it. We talk about it a lot more. And so I don't think there should be a fear associated with that. And so I guess to a certain extent, that's what I would try and tell someone is that, like, even if you're just questioning it, just go talk to somebody. Just go see. Maybe, if you don't have someone else that you can talk to, go and just kind of bounce some ideas and some feelings off of somebody. And maybe just that alone is enough to make you feel better. But I just think, again, everything that I think about comes back to connection and having a strong support network. If you can have that and have somebody that is willing to say, hey, you know what? Like, you seem a little bit off. You seem a little bit down. Like,
Yeah.
maybe I'm not doing enough as a friend, and maybe you need to kind of move and go talk to a professional. Maybe that someone can help you with something. Or hey, maybe you're doing too much and you're burning from both ends of the candle, and you kind of need to just take a break. And I'm going to tell you as a friend, I think you need to sit down and take a break.
Yeah.
It's I think those are probably the two things. Is one, don't be scared of it. Don't be scared of mental health. And the other is try and surround yourself with people who are going to be honest with you about where they think you are if they think you need help.
Yeah, I think that's great advice because as someone who probably is the worst person for when it comes to asking for help, I'm really thankful for all the friends that I have in my corner who over the years have been like, you know what, maybe you should, are you sure you don't need help right now? And whatnot, because it is hard. And so it's good to hear that.
I love reading. My Goodreads is unhinged, and I thoroughly in love just a good book. I've always been a reader, so that's probably my big one for me. And baking, I love baking and just kind of cooking and all of that kind of stuff. Anything creative for me really helps. Like I love all sorts of different kind of painting or any sort of arts and crafts. Those kind of things really just help me kind of recharge and bring me back.
Well, do you have any books you recommend?
Well, I did already mention The Anxious Generation and A Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt, and those ones I pretty much will tell everybody to read. I think those are such important books, but those are not necessarily fun books. Um, I love anything by Sarah J. Maas, the Akatar
Queen.
series. I'm a huge fan of Catherine Cowles and Maggie Rodden and Erin Mackenzie. The right, I mean, more romance stuff. I can probably, I can give you a recommendation of any genre in the romance like group, if you will. You give me a subtype and I can probably give it to you.
So what we're hearing
But
is people should just check you out on Goodreads and then
yeah.
and then go from there.
But the other two that I named by titles, those ones are for sure important, I think, for people to read. The Anxious Generation and The Calling of the American Mind. I think those are incredibly important books for people to read. But otherwise, I'm all about the romance and romanticy and the mass verse, if you will.
I agree. I'm
I love
reading the
that.
tandem read right now and it's amazing.
Oh, good. She writes such good. Sarah J. Maas writes such amazing fantasy world building with so I think that my legacy, if I left and there were people behind that said that I made a positive impact on their life and inspired them to make a positive impact in someone else's life, that would be legacy enough for me.
I love that. Short, to the point, and really powerful. So that's awesome.
Well, that kind of wraps us up with all the questions that we wanted to ask today.
Yes, we are so grateful that you wanted to come on the Bring Us One podcast with us. We really enjoyed our conversation with you, and we think our listeners are really going to love a lot of the convos that we had.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. I wish you so much luck with this podcast. I think it's great what you guys are doing.
Thank you for joining us on the Bring Us Women podcast. We hoped you felt seen, encouraged, and a little more unstoppable after hearing Kali's story. She showed us that you can serve, study, mother, lead, and still make room for the dreams that refuse to let go. Check out our Instagram at Bring Us Women for bonus content from today's episode. Until next time, be bold, keep leading, and we can't wait to bring you the next woman.